Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're jumping into something that's a pretty major step for a lot of people here. The process of becoming a German citizen.
That's right. And we're basing this on information you sent over, straight from the horse's mouth, really the German government's own website. Their pages on naturalization in Germany and the key questions section.
Exactly. So think of this as us, taking that official info and trying to pull out what really matters. What do you actually need to know about requirements, the steps involved, based purely on this official source?
Yeah. Our goal is just to cut through maybe the complexity and give you a clear rundown of the path as the government itself describes it.
Okay, let's unpack this then.
All right. So first things first. Who actually kicks this whole process off? The documents are pretty clear. If you're 16 or older, you apply yourself. Simple as that.
And if you're younger?
Then it's usually a legal representative, typically parents, who handles the application for anyone under 16.
Makes sense. So, okay, you know who applies. Where do you actually, go?
You submit the application to what they call your local nationality authority, the Staatsangehörigkeitsbehörde.
Okay, that's a bit of a mouthful.
Yeah.
How do you find that?
Yeah, it sounds formal, but they clarify you can usually find out through your town or city administration, Stadtverwaltung or Kreisverwaltung, or maybe the borough office, the Bezirksamt, even the Foreigners Authority, the Ausländerbehörde.
Migration advice centers, too, they mentioned.
Right, those centers can often point you in the right direction as well.
And the process itself. It's not just showing up, is it?
No, definitely not. The sources say you should get the forms first. Fill them all out, gather up all the documents they ask for, that's key, and then submit the whole package.
They also mention online applications. Is that common?
They do mention it, yeah. It says it depends on the specific authority, so some might offer online options, which is, a modern touch. You'd have to check locally.
All right, let's get to a big question for anyone considering this. The cost. What are we looking at fee-wise?
The standard fee, according to these documents, is 255 SEK per person applying.
Per person? What about kids being naturalized with their parents?
Yes. For underage children who don't have their own income and are being naturalized alongside their parents, the fee is usually much lower, typically €51 per child.
That's a significant difference.
Yeah.
But what if even the main fee is, a struggle for someone?
That's a really important point they cover. If you genuinely can't afford it, you should talk to the authority. The sources mention the possibility of applying for lower fees or maybe paying in installments, so communication is key there.
Good to know. And it's not just the application fee itself, right? There could be other costs.
Exactly. You need to factor in potential costs for things like the naturalization test itself, maybe getting official proof of your identity if you need new documents, or even a language certificate if you don't already have one that's accepted. Those can add up.
Okay, that makes sense. So you've gathered your documents, paid the fee. Now comes the waiting. How long does this process actually take?
Yeah, this is where patience comes in. The documents are quite direct about it. They state you should expect a processing time of 18 months or longer. It really depends on the individual case, the specific authority, how complex things are.
18 months or longer.
Wow. And it's not necessarily radio silence during that time. They also mention that the authorities might reach out and ask for more supporting documents while they're processing everything.
So definitely not something that happens overnight. Okay, let's dig into the core requirements then. What do you absolutely need to demonstrate? The big one seems to be how long you've lived here.
That's fundamental, yes. The general rule is you need to have legally lived in Germany, with it being your main home, for at least 5 years without interruption.
Without interruption. What does that mean? Like, can you go on holiday?
Oh yeah, short holidays or trips abroad are usually fine. They don't break that continuous residency. It's about where your main life base has been.
Got it. But does all time spent in Germany count towards those 5 years? Are there statuses that, don't count?
That's a crucial distinction they make. Time spent here under what's called a Duldung, that's a temporary suspension of deportation, that time does not count.
Why not?
Because it's not considered a secure legal residence permit. It's sort of a temporary holding status. Also, time spent just during an asylum procedure only counts if you were eventually granted asylum, refugee status, or subsidiary protection.
Okay, so 5 years is the standard.
Yeah.
But you mentioned earlier, can it sometimes be faster?
Yes, it can. The documents say if you've made a particular effort to integrate, you might be able to apply after just 3 years.
What counts as particular effort?
They don't define it exhaustively in this overview, but it usually implies things beyond the basic requirements, maybe high language skills, civic engagement, things like that. And speaking of language, if you have really strong German, like C1 level or higher, and meet some other conditions, it's potentially possible even faster than 3 years.
So integration efforts and language skills can really make a difference time-wise.
Definitely seems to be the case according to this source.
And you also mentioned some historical exceptions for residence time.
Right. There are special rules for guest workers who came to West Germany by June 30th, 1974, or contract workers who came to the GDR, East Germany, by June 13th, 1990.
Okay.
For them, and also for their spouses who joined them later, the way the required residence time is calculated can be different, potentially more lenient.
Interesting. Okay, moving on from time to language skills. What level of German do you generally need?
The standard requirement is sufficient language skills, which they define as B1 level according to the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, the CEFR.
B1. What does that mean in practice?
B1 is generally seen as an intermediate level. You can handle most everyday conversations, understand main points, express yourself reasonably well on familiar topics. Usually you prove this by passing the German test for immigrants, the DTZ.
Are there other ways to prove you've got that B1 level besides the DTZ test?
Yes, absolutely. Successfully completing an official integration course usually counts. Or if you've got a German school-leaving certificate like the Abitur or a degree from a German university, those are typically accepted as proof too.
And what about those historical guest and contract workers you mentioned? Is the language bar different for them?
It is. For that specific group and their spouses who came later, the requirement is lower. They just need to show they can communicate verbally in German in everyday life. They don't necessarily need the formal B1 certificate.
That's a significant difference. Now, what if someone genuinely tries hard, studies, but just struggles to reach that B1 level, maybe due to age or illness?
The documents do address that. There can be exceptions made under specific hardship circumstances. If you've made a serious, sustained effort but can't reach B1 due to, say, a documented illness or disability, you'd need a medical certificate.
Okay.
Or perhaps if advanced age makes learning significantly harder. They also mention other potential hardship cases, like if you're providing full-time care for a relative.
So there's some flexibility.
There is, but even in these cases, they state you still need to be able to communicate verbally in everyday German. It's not a complete waiver, more like adjusting the formal proof requirement based on individual circumstances assessed by the authority.
Right. Okay, let's shift gears to something a lot of people ask about. Keeping your original citizenship. Can you be a dual citizen?
This is a big one, and according to these documents, based on recent changes in German law, the answer is yes. German law now allows you to hold multiple citizenships when you naturalize.
That's huge news for many, but there's a really important catch, isn't there?
Absolutely critical.
Right.
While Germany is okay with it, your other country might not be.
Oh.
The laws of your country of previous citizenship might state that you automatically lose their citizenship the moment you gain German citizenship. So you absolutely must check the laws of that country.
How do you?
The documents recommend contacting the embassy or consulate of your previous country to get definitive information on their rules about dual nationality. Don't assume it's okay just because Germany allows it.
Very important point. Okay, beyond language and residence, there's usually a test involved too, right? The naturalization test.
Yes, that's generally required if you're 16 or older. It tests your knowledge of Germany's legal system, society, and way of life.
And there's a fee for that?
Yep, $25 for the test itself.
Are there ways around taking this test? Any exemptions?
There are several. If you've already passed the Life in Germany test, which is often part of the integration course, you're usually exempt. Same if you have a German school-leaving certificate.
What about a university degree?
A German university degree might exempt you, but the advice is to check specifically with your local authority. It often depends on the subject studied, like law or social sciences.
Okay.
And again, those historical guest contract workers and their spouses are typically exempt. Plus, similar to the language rule, if you have a medical certificate showing you can't take the test due to illness, disability, or age, you can be excused.
Good to know. They mentioned the BAMF website for practice questions and finding test centers, which seems useful.
Definitely a good resource for preparation.
All right, another major requirement. Proving you can support yourself financially. What's the deal here?
The core requirement is that you must be able to support yourself and any dependents financially from your own means, basically your income or assets.
And how do they usually define that? Like, what are you not supposed to be receiving?
Generally, it means you shouldn't be receiving benefits like Citizens Benefit, Burger Guild, Social Assistance, SOCILIF, or Social Allowance, Social Guild.
That sounds pretty strict. Are there any exceptions to that rule?
Yes, quite a few actually, which is interesting. The rule doesn't apply to those former guest contract workers and their spouses if they're receiving benefits through no fault of their own.
Okay, that's one group. Any others?
A big one is for people who've been working full-time for at least 20 of the last 24 months before applying. So even if you're temporarily receiving benefits at the time of application, that recent solid work history can override it.
That's significant. What about family situations?
Yes, they cover that too. If you're a spouse or partner living with an underage child and your spouse partner works full-time, their income might be enough to cover the requirement for both of you. Also, single parents or those caring for children with special needs which prevent full-time work might be exempt.
Any other cases?
They mention people with low pensions despite a long work history, and individuals with disabilities or illnesses that prevent them from fully supporting themselves. The authority has some discretion there to evaluate the situation. So while the starting point is self-sufficiency, there are quite a few potential carve-outs.
That's quite nuanced. Okay, what about your past record? Criminal convictions.
Generally, a final conviction for a criminal offense, either in Germany or abroad, is a barrier to naturalization.
Are there any exceptions for, say, minor things? The speeding ticket.
Yes, they do specify exceptions for minor offenses, things like a one-off minor traffic fine or warning, or financial penalties below a certain threshold they mention up to 90 daily rates. Even a suspended prison sentence of up to 3 months might be okay if you successfully completed probation without issues. But this is big, but there's an absolute bar if the offense was committed for racist, anti-Semitic, or other inhumane motives showing contempt for humanity. No exceptions there. That automatically disqualifies you.
That's very clear. What if someone has something ongoing? An investigation or court case?
You have to wait. The documents state clearly that if there are current criminal proceedings or investigations against you, even abroad, you must wait until they are fully concluded before your naturalization can proceed. And you're obligated to tell the authority about any such ongoing proceedings.
Okay, that covers the main individual requirements. What about applying as a family, spouses, or partners?
Yes, they detail that. If you're married or in a registered civil partnership, your spouse or partner might be eligible for naturalization too. The conditions are usually being married partnered for at least 2 years and having lived legally in Germany for 3 years.
So a shorter residency requirement for the spouse.
Often, yes, compared to the standard 5 years if they meet the other requirements like language, test, etc. There's also a possibility mentioned for even faster naturalization for a spouse, less than 3 years residence, if the marriage has lasted 3 years or more and there's a public interest reason.
When would it not be possible for a spouse under these rules?
Well, obviously, if the marriage or partnership has ended or failed before the naturalization is finalized, or if divorce or separation is planned and you're already living apart, the relationship needs to be intact.
Makes sense. And children, can they be included?
Generally, yes. Underage children can usually be naturalized with their parents if certain conditions are met. The parent needs custody, they need to live together in Germany, the child is under 16.
In language?
Yes. The child usually needs to be able to communicate in German appropriately for their age and everyday life. There's also a specific rule for very young kids under 6. They generally need to have lived in Germany for at least half their life.
What about older teenagers, 16 or 17?
For children aged 16 and over, they usually have to meet all the requirements themselves, just like an adult applicant, including the test, language level, etc.
And can the whole family apply together?
Yes, the sources suggest that typically your spouse or partner and your underage children can be naturalized together with you, assuming everyone meets their respective requirements with that potential shorter residence period for the family members.
Okay, that brings the family aspect together. And just to quickly confirm, those specific dates for guest and contract workers before mid-1974 for the West, mid-1990 for the East, those are the key cutoffs for those specific exceptions we discussed.
Exactly. Those dates define eligibility for the special considerations regarding residence time and language proof for those historical groups and their spouses.
Got it. One last practical point the documents cover. What happens after you apply? Do you need to keep the authorities updated?
Absolutely. They stress that you have an obligation to inform the Nationality Authority in writing about any significant changes to your details while the application is processing.
Like what kind of changes?
Things like moving house, changing your surname, getting a new job, or significant changes in your income situation. They often make you sign something agreeing to report these changes.
And what about your documents, like your passport?
That's crucial too. You need to ensure your identification documents, like your passport or residency permit, remain valid throughout the entire process. If something expires while you're waiting those 18+ months, you need to get it renewed. The naturalization can't be completed without valid documents.
Okay, so staying on top of paperwork and communication is vital even after submitting. So bringing this all together, what's the big picture here?
Well, from these official government sources, it's clear that becoming a German citizen is a very structured, detailed process. There are clear benchmarks for residence, language, civic knowledge, financial stability, and your personal record. We've gone through the who, where, how much, and how long.
And we've also seen how it applies differently in family contexts for spouses, for children of different ages, and those really specific historical exceptions for guest and contract workers. What strikes me is the level of detail, not just in the main rules, but also in the quite numerous exceptions and discretions built in.
Exactly. It paints a picture of a system that, while demanding specific criteria, also tries to account for individual circumstances, hardship, integration efforts, and historical context. It's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all checklist, even though the framework is very defined.
It shows a path that requires commitment and meeting standards, but maybe with some human elements considered along the way. Based on everything we've unpacked from this source material, perhaps a final thought to leave you with is this. How does this intricate blend of strict requirements and specific exceptions reflect Germany's ongoing effort to balance national identity with the practical integration of people who have made Germany their home?